Hello, everybody, and welcome to the June edition of our Crash Course, June edition of the Educators Hub's Crash Course. And this June, we are considering teaching your students to think about their thinking, teaching your students to think about how they think, about how they learn, teaching your students to understand how they learn, and that is metacognition, metacognition in the classroom. That's the topic we are treating in June. This crash course is a monthly affair. So this June, what we are talking about is metacognition in the classroom. And metacognition, we are going to see how metacognition is the most powerful tool that your students are actually not using yet. So now, why is this session important? This thing we are talking about today, why is it important? In fact, metacognition, it shows, or lack of it shows, in the classroom many times, because many teachers have experienced it. Most teachers have experienced this. And what is that thing that they've experienced? Where you explain a concept, explain it clearly, that is to your own understanding. You believe, or you expect that the students understand what you're saying. You ask them, do you have any question? Nobody answers. Then you move on your merry way because nobody asked any question. Only for you to now give them a test, or give them an assignment, or give them an assessment. You now discover that half of the class got everything wrong. Not because they were not paying attention, but because they genuinely thought they understood. They had no idea that they didn't understand. And that's the gap that metacognition is trying to fill, is the gap that exists between what students think they know and what they actually know. One of the invisible problems in education, and metacognition is that tool that closes it. Metacognition is that tool that closes it. So what is metacognition? Simply is just thinking about your own thinking, thinking about how you're learning, what you're doing is it working. This process of learning, is it working? What do I actually understand, or what do I need to do differently? And as we've seen, research constantly places metacognition among the highest impact strategies for student achievement. One of the highest impact strategies for student achievement. But it's unfortunate that many students are yet to be taught how to be metacognitive. Yeah, many students were expected to develop it on their own, and many of them never do, because one, they don't know what it is, and they don't know what it is, so they can't try to develop it on their own. So this session is going to change that, not with theory, but with practical tools that you can, start working with in your classroom, even from today, in fact, or from this week. So now, what's metacognition? A very short definition. Metacognition is the ability to think about thinking, ability to think about your own thinking, ability to monitor, ability to evaluate, ability to adjust how you're learning. That is what metacognition is. It's from the Greek word meta, which means beyond or above. So metacognition essentially is thinking that sits above thinking. There is thinking, and there is one that sits above thinking. So it's the mental habit of stopping and asking, how is this going for me as a learner? What I am learning, how is it going on for me as a learner? We say that it involves monitoring, evaluating, and adjusting how you're learning. So in monitoring, you notice what is not working, or you notice what is working and what is not working as you learn in real time. In real time, evaluating is now, okay, what you've learned, is your understanding deep enough, or is it just surface level? Then for adjusting, which is the third one, is, okay, this my understanding, is it working? This my approach, is it producing results? So is changing your approach when the current one is not producing results. So metacognition was coined by the psychologist John Flavel in the 1970s, and he described it as knowledge and cognition about cognitive phenomena. Cognitive has to do with thinking. So he says that it's knowledge and cognition about cognitive phenomena. Now, what we really need in this explanation is the classroom version. And the classroom version is teaching students how to know how they learn. That is it. Teaching students to know how they learn, to know when they are confused, and to know what to do about that confusion. So metacognition is not just teaching them how to think, it's also teaching them, okay, what do they think about, or what would they now do about the confusion that they are facing. So this session is very important. It's very, very important than most things that we teach because according to the Education Endowment Foundation, which is one of the most respected education research bodies in the world, it found out that metacognition and self-regulation has an average impact of plus 7 months of additional learning progress per year. Plus 7 months of additional learning progress per year. I mean, students that think about their thinking, they have additional learning progress. They've done the research and found out that the students that are allowed to think about their thinking, they report additional learning progress per year. So this made metacognition to be one of the high value impacts or high impact strategies available to teachers. Now, the practical implication of this is a student who knows how to learn just does not just learn more. What do? They learn better, they learn faster, and they learn more independently. And that is the goal for every teacher that is watching this, that is reading what is on this slide. That is the goal. So, what is metacognition not? What is it not? Before we move further, we need to clear the air. What is metacognition not? The first is not just self reflection, it's not just self reflection. Yeah, writing on a journal saying that you feel confused is the starting point, not the full picture. Metacognition includes doing something about that confusion. That is the essence of metacognition. Okay, you know that you are confused. Yeah, so what have you done about it? Now, it's also not only for older students. Research has shown that even young students can develop metacognitive habits when they are taught explicitly and when they are taught consistently. That is why you're on this call. You're on this call to learn how you can think about your thinking so that you can now teach your students, no matter their level, to think about their own thinking. Okay, the third thing metacognition is not a separate subject to teach. No, it is interwoven in how you teach any subject, any lesson, any time, any day. It lives inside your teaching. It's not something that is outside of your teaching. So metacognition is not just self-reflection, it's not only for older students, and it's not a separate subject to teach. Now you're going to think about your thinking now. Before we move forward further, let us think about or let us explore what metacognition looks like in your students and using you as an example. So yeah, I want you to think about the last time you learned something new outside of work, a recipe, a skill, a route, a piece of technology, anything that does not have to do with your work. Now answer these questions on a paper or just on your head. The first question is, how did you go about learning it? How did you go about learning it? Where did you learn it from? The second one is, at what point did you know you actually understood it, not just thought you did? When you know that you actually understood it, at what point? Now the third question is, did your approach change when something wasn't working? Yes. Remember you said you understood, okay? When you now try to apply what you understood, did your approach change when something was not working? Now, I want to ask you now, how often do you explicitly ask your students this kind of question during a lesson? How often do you get to ask them this kind of questions during your lesson? Think about that. Know that reviewing your learning process, noticing when it worked and when it didn't work, identifying the moment real understanding arrived, that is metacognition. Because what you just did now is metacognition. And I'm here to tell you once again that your students need metacognition. They need this same internal conversation. I mean, conversation with themselves. They need it as much as you do. Now, our job is to teach them how to think about their thinking. So, metacognition, I divided them into two parts. We have the metacognitive knowledge and the metacognitive regulation. Now, the metacognitive knowledge asks this question: what does the learners know about themselves? What do they know about tasks? What do they know about strategies? Meta regulation is asking, okay, what do the learners now do with that knowledge? So let's go to meta cognitive knowledge, where learners get to know about themselves. So this is simply the understanding that a student has about how learning works for them, and how learning works in general. How learning works for them and how learning works in general. And it has three layers. The first layer is knowledge about themselves as a learner. Knowledge about themselves as a learner. This is where they get to say, I understand things better when I draw them out, or I get distracted when I try to revise with the music on, or I'm stronger at written tasks than spoken ones. So this is talking about themselves, how they understand their own learning process. The second level, or the second part of this metacognitive knowledge, is knowledge about the task, knowledge about what you've given them to do. Okay, this is where they get to ask where they get to say this type of question needs analysis, not just describing, depending on how the question is. When they look at it, they will not think this question is not the question you just get to maybe define, but you have to analyze, you have to describe how you arrived at the learning. So this is knowledge about the task. Or you hear them say this topic is more complex than it looks. I need to give it more time. We're still talking about understanding the task. Or you hear them say, I've seen this before, so I can build on what I already know. So this is about understanding the task. The third part of metacognitive knowledge is knowledge about the strategies. Yes, knowledge about the strategies that help their learning. Some students believe that rereading does not help their learning. In fact, yes. Some get confused when they reread, unless they are given an example or a scenario. So any student that says, okay, I'm confused rereading, I need an example, that child is doing metacognition. Or any student that say, making a summary of my notes in my own words checks whether I understand it better or not. Or some of them will get to say that teaching others, teaching someone else, is the best way for me to really know if I got this or not. Now let's move to the second part of metacognition, which is metacognitive regulation. Metacognitive regulation is now, okay, the knowledge that they got from the first part, what do they now do with that knowledge? This is the part that is talking about it. So this is the active part of metacognition. This is where the monitoring and the adjusting and evaluating of learning comes in. It also has three stages. It has the planning stage, it has the monitoring stage, and it has the evaluating stage. So the planning stage happens before the lesson. Yes, happens before the lesson. This is where they get to ask, what do I already know? What is my approach? How much time do I need to know more? Yes, so this is the planning stage, and they come into the class armed with this understanding. Now, the second stage is the monitoring stage. This happens during the lesson. During the lesson, as you're teaching, they get to ask, is this thing making sense to me? Am I understanding? Should I adjust? Should I try something different? Should I slow down? Should I be faster? Am I on track? This is where they get to check this, because remember, it is monitoring. The third phase, which is evaluating, this happens after the lesson. This is where they get to ask, okay, did I achieve what I set out to achieve from the planning stage? Remember, they planned. Or what should I do differently next time? This is evaluating. Now, the point here is that knowledge without regulation, that's the first one, without the second one, is incomplete. Knowledge without regulation is incomplete, because a student can know that they learn best through diagrams, yes, but never draw one. This is where the second part comes in. Yeah, I learn best through diagram, but they never draw one. Also, regulation without knowledge is scattered. The first one without the second one is scattered. A student who constantly adjusts but does not understand their own patterns ends up being confused. When they don't understand themselves, when they don't understand the task, when they don't understand the strategies, but they've taken care of planning, monitoring, and evaluating, the student end up being confused. So both parts are very, very important. They need to be developed and both parts can be taught. Now let's go to what metacognition looks like in the classroom. We're going to be looking at how your students or how they behave when they have it and students that does not have metacognition. So a student without metacognition reads a passage and concludes that they understood it or assumes they understood that passage. But a student with metacognition reads the passage and now asks, could I explain this passage or this question in my own words? Yes. The second one, a student without metacognition stares at it as a hard question or a difficult question and gives up, even without making an attempt. But a student with metacognition looks at the particular question and now say, okay, what do I already know that connects to this question? That is thinking about what they knew that will now connect to the question. A student without metacognition revises by rereading notes repeatedly, hoping that by rereading that understanding is achieved. But a student with metacognition chooses strategies or finds out strategies based on what type of content that they're actually studying. You know, there are some content that understanding is gotten when you solve, understanding is gotten when you draw, understanding is gotten when you represent. So a student with metacognition will find out the strategy that works best for that content type. A student without metacognition gets a wrong answer. A student without metacognition gets a wrong answer and feels confused and might just decide to give up. But a student with metacognition now asks the question, where exactly did my thinking go wrong? Where did I miss the step? Also, a student without metacognition finishes a task and move on without review on anything. But a student with metacognition reviews what he or she has done and now asks, did I actually do what I'm expected to do? Did I actually do what the task asked me to do? Is this my best work? A student without metacognition relies entirely on the teacher to know if they are on track. But a student with metacognition self-monitors and adjusts independently. So these are the difference between a student with metacognition and a student without metacognition. Now let's move into what metacognition sounds like in the classroom. When your students have it, how will you know? I always say that metacognition is partly audible. It's actually audible. So when your students have it, you're going to know, and that's when you start hearing things like, I think I understand the main idea, but I'm not sure about this particular part. The students also say, that does not match what I said earlier. Let me rethink. The students also say, okay, I'm going to try drawing this because reading isn't working for me. The students also get to say, I got this right, but I'm not sure why. I think I should check my method. Yes. The students also, students with metacognition, or when their students have it, that's when you start hearing, I need to slow down on this part. It's a bit more complicated. Yes. But when students don't have it, their answers are easily, I don't know. When you ask them a question, they say, I don't know, without even thinking. Or they say, maybe now when they now fail the test or the assignment, they say, I thought I knew it without even thinking. And they also say, I studied, but I still failed without trying to understand why they failed, without trying to understand what went wrong, without trying to understand where they missed the mark. So this is how metacognition sounds in your classroom. Now let's go to different examples of how metacognition can be cultivated in your classroom. So we have subject specific examples. The first is mathematics. A metacognitive student finishes a problem and now asks, does this answer make sense? Let me rework this, or let me work it backward and check. But a non-metacognitive student writes the answer and moves on, never questioning whether it is reasonable or not. Now let's move to English. English and writing, essay writing. A metacognitive student reads their paragraph and now asks, have I actually understand the topic, or have I actually answered the question, or did I just write around it? A non-metacognitive student submits the question or the answer without bothering to reread if they've really given the answer to the question. Now, moving to science, a metacognitive student says, I can describe photosynthesis, but I can't explain it to someone else. That means I don't fully understand it yet. Anything that you can explain to someone else, it means that you've understood that concept. But a non-metacognitive student thinks that knowing the definition is enough. So they believe that once they know the definition, I am good to go. They don't want to think about, thinking. Now we're going to be talking about how do you now teach metacognition practically? How do you teach metacognition to your students practically? So we'll be talking about different strategies that you can start using immediately. You don't need any special material, any special equipment. So I have six of them. Starting with the first one, which is the think aloud method. Yes, the think aloud strategy. Here, you, the teacher, you now model thinking by thinking out loud. Yes, you model your own thinking process by thinking out loud. You can do that when you're solving a problem, or when you're trying to discover something or find out something, when you're trying to explain a concept, including your uncertainty and your corrections. So even when you make error, think out loud. Now, why is this important? It's important because most students have no idea what good thinking sounds like from inside. So, but when you think out loud, when you verbalize your reasoning, including your corrections, including your uncertainties, you make the invisible visible. Invisible thinking, you make it visible to your students. Now, how does this look in practice? You can say, before I start this, let me think about what I already know. Then you think about what you already think out loud. Okay, now that I'm reading the question, I notice it's asking me to compare, not just describe. So my approach will be different. You keep on thinking out loud. Yes, keep on thinking out loud. Now we have different subject examples. In mathematics, you talk through decision making as you solve. As you're solving the problem, you talk through decision making. In history, you think out loud about how you evaluate a source before you now accept it. Yes, you think out loud the things you considered before you accepted a particular source. Now, in English, you narrate your reading comprehension out loud. The comprehension process, you narrate it out loud. Let's move to the second strategy, which is the metacognitive journal or the learning diary. The learning diary. So this is just a brief, regular written or spoken record where students reflect on their learning, not just what they learned, but how they learned. So it's a regular reflection, brief but regular reflection, where students now reflect on how they learn. So three questions can guide this. Yes, three questions, and it works for any subject, any level, any class. Now the first question your students will have to answer in their journal. Yes, now this is the question you ask them in their journal. You can write it out somewhere so that they will use it will guide their metacognitive process. So the first question is, what did I understand well today? They will write it down. The second question is, what am I still unsure about? They will write it down. The third, what will I do about what I am unsure of? They write it down. So this does not need to be a full paragraph. Three sentences at the end of a lesson. It can be on a sticky note, it can be a voice memo, it can be a quick peer share. The most important thing is they cultivating the habit. So the format is not so important, but the students cultivating the habit of thinking is more important. Now let's go to the third strategy, which is pre-lesson and post-lesson checks. So this happened before the lesson and after the lesson. So before the lesson or pre-lesson is a brief assessment method moment that start and end at the lesson. So you prompt the student to monitor their own understanding. You prompt the student to monitor their process of comprehension, their process of understanding. So before the lesson, you can ask the student on a scale of 1 to 5, how confident are you in this particular topic? Write one thing you already know and one thing you want to understand by the end of this topic. Then this sets a learning intention to make your students to be intentional about their learning, make them engage because they want to fill in that gap that is what you want to understand by the end of the learning. Now, after the lesson, you now take them back to their scale, that's to their 1 to 5 scale. You now ask them, has it changed? Assuming what they chose on the scale in the first place was 1 or 2. After the lesson, you now ask them, okay, has the scale moved from 2? What number is it at now? They might say 4 or 3, which is a progress, actually, it's a progress. So you can ask them, okay, has the scale changed? What is one thing that made the biggest difference in your understanding today? They all write it down. They all write it down. Now, here progress becomes visible because it builds the self-monitoring spirit habit. When they know that they are going to answer a question at the end of the class, it will make them to be intentional about their learning. Yes, make them to purposefully engage in their learning. So this is important because students set a learning intention at the start and they engage more purposefully. So the end check makes progress visible, which builds a habit of self-monitoring over time. So even if you don't tell them, maybe you forgot, you didn't tell them, they will remember because they're already used to it. Now the next strategy, the fourth strategy, is you teach the strategies by name. You teach that is the strategies you're teaching, you teach it by name. Explicitly name and explain learning strategies so that students can choose them deliberately, choose the strategy they want to use to make their learning stick. Many students don't know that they have options, they have different strategies that they can learn by. They think learning means reading and reading, but reading, we've seen that reading and reading does not really help understanding. But when you introduce strategies with names and their purposes, students begin to make conscious choices. So I have a short toolkit here of different strategies and what it involves and what it's best for. The first one is the retrieval practice. Here, this is where students get to write out what they remember before they check their notes. So this for recall and yes, real test for real recall. Now, the second strategy is self-explanatory strategy or self-explanation strategy. Here, the students get to explain the concept in their own words, either on paper or out loud. This checks comprehension, checks if the student really understood what you're teaching. Now, the next strategy is the elaborative interrogation. Here, this is where you now ask them why or how. They present a fact. You ask them, why do you say so? Or how did you arrive at this particular understanding? So this deepens understanding. It deepens the understanding of your students. The next strategy is spaced practice. So this is where they revisit materials over a spread out time individual intervals. So this helps long term retention. So you give them different topics that they will read across maybe throughout the term, so that by the end of the term, retention is achieved. Now the next strategy is interleaving. Interleaving is when you mix two topics or two problems in one session, when you mix them up. So this helps with flexible thinking. The goal or the point here is not to overwhelm the students, but you start with options, start with 2 or 3 strategies and let the student try them. They will tell you what worked for them and what did not work for them. Now let's move to the next strategy, the fifth strategy, which is the confusion corner. The confusion corner. So this is a designated moment or space. It can be physical, it can be digital, where students name specifically what they don't understand. Yes. This is where they name what they don't specifically, what they don't understand. So unfortunately, most students conflate I'm confused with I don't understand anything. It's at this point that the clarity or the demarcation, the difference is achieved. So metacognition requires precision. Metacognition asks the question, what exactly is confusing? Where did the understanding break down? Where did you get lost? That's what metacognition asks. So you can now say ask the student to write one sentence or complete the sentence where you say, I understand this, but I'm confused about this. I understand this, but I'm confused about this. So this is the confusion corner. So the first blank forces them to acknowledge what they know. Forces them to acknowledge what they know. Remember, we say that most students conflict and confused with I don't understand anything. The second blank makes them to name that confusion specifically, to name it specifically. So both are very, very essential. You can try it as exit tickets, maybe when they are leaving or when you're leaving the class, they just write anonymous notes of what they don't understand and hand it to you. You now go over it and know if you're going to retake that topic or you're going to use another approach. You can also be WhatsApp anonymous check-ins. You can use poll, WhatsApp poll, make the poll anonymous so that the students can, be free to say what they want to say. It can also be sticky notes, maybe on a board or sticky notes on somewhere. It can be two colors, one for what they know and one for what they are still confused about. Now, let's talk about the last strategy. The last strategy here is peer teaching. Peer teaching. So, this peer teaching is when a student explain a concept to another classmate. Then both of them will now discuss to find out where the explanation broke down or where they left off in understanding. So, it's told that we've known or we know that the act of teaching someone else is one of the most powerful metacognitive triggers available. Yes, because as you're teaching somebody, you know better, you know more, and you get to find out okay where what gap is it that that I have, both for you, the explainer, and for you and for your listener. So it forces the students to confront the gaps between what they think they know and what they actually can explain. Now, how do you do it? You tell your students, you pair them, maybe sit partners, tell them explain to your partner what we've just covered. Your partner's job is not to correct you, but to ask you clarifying questions. Now, this develop metacognitive knowledge because the listener will say, I noticed I couldn't follow the part about this, that. That means I need to go back to it. The explainer is forced to confront the gaps between knowing and explaining. Remember, I said that anything that you can explain, it means that you really, really know it. So these are the six strategies of how you can practice metacognition even in your classroom. I mean, even today. So pick any two and start with them. You can't start with all of them at once. Pick any two, run with it, and see the one that works best for your students. Now, let's move to the teacher's role. What is your role in metacognition? What is the teacher's role in metacognition? Always bear in mind that you are the most powerful metacognitive model in the classroom. Yes, you are the most powerful metacognitive model in your classroom. So students learn how to think partly by watching how you, their teacher, think. When they see how you think, when you think out, that's why I said you think out loud. If you hide your reasoning, if you hide your uncertainty, if you hide your corrections, the students assume that good thinkers just know things automatically. They will not know that yes, good thinkers also have some places, they fall off, the places they make mistake. And this is very, very damaging because when they grow up with it, they will rather not, they will just call themselves that they are bad thinkers. So there's no point thinking. When you model metacognition, you give the students permission to think, not just to perform. Now, how can you start? How can you model this? Four ways that you can model this, or four things you can start doing in your classroom on Monday. The first thing is you make your thinking audible. Before solving anything, just say, explain, or just say it, speak it out, say, let me think about how I'm going to approach this subject. Approach this topic. Say it out loud. Let the students hear you. Now, the second way you can do that, or you can model metacognition, is you normalize not knowing with a response. You actually don't know everything. So instead of saying, I'm not sure, and end it there, you can say, I'm not sure. Here's how we're going to go about finding it out together. And you find it out together with your students. So that is the full metacognitive move. Metacognition, remember, is of two parts: understanding where you fell off, okay, and what next am I going to do about it. Now, the third strategy, or the third thing you can do in the class, is you ask metacognitive questions to your students daily or regularly. Ask them metacognitive questions, not just do you understand, but how did you arrive at this answer? How did you arrive at this answer? Show your workings. What would you do if this your approach you use is not working? What part of this lesson now feels solid? What part of it feels shaky? What part of it do you understand? What part of it don't you understand? The fourth way you can model metacognition in the class is you name the strategy that you are using. You name the strategy you're using. Are you using a diagram? Are you using solving? Are you using whatever strategy it is you're using? You can now name it and explain why you're using it. So you can say, I am using a diagram here because this is a relationships between parts concept. So if you want to draw a relationship between different things, it's actually advisable to use a diagram so the students will see the relationship. So when students see that the strategy selection that you do it, they will see that it is a very normal thing to do. Yeah. So when you name your strategy, students see it as a normal part of thinking. So I have some reflective questions here that you can think about, even as a teacher. Think about it. Think about the student who consistently underperforms despite trying. Could a lack of metacognitive skills be part of the problem? Very, very important. What would you try first? Now, the second question is, which of the six strategies, the ones we mentioned, which of the six strategies feels more applicable to your subject or to your level? What will stop you from using it this week? The next question is, how often do you make your own thinking visible to your students? What's one moment in your next lesson where you could think out loud? You need to answer that question. The fourth one is, what's one question you would add to your regular teaching that will prompt students to monitor their own understanding? You need to ask yourself that question and you need to answer, not just ask, you need to also answer that question. So now let's conclude. The goal of education is not to raise students who can answer questions. The goal of education is to raise students who can ask the right question in their subjects, their sources, and most importantly, of themselves. Yes, students who can ask the right question. So metacognition is the difference between a student who studies hard and still fails, and a student who know exactly how to prepare, where they went wrong, and what to do next time. Remember that you cannot think for your students, but you can teach them how to think. Yes, you can teach them how to think. And one beautiful thing about metacognition is, once the skill is developed, it will serve your students throughout their life, even when they've left your classroom, when they are done with school. So all you need to do, you start small. You can start with one think out loud, or one confusion corner prompt, or one question that asks what they know, not just what they know, but how they know it. Start small. That is where it begins. Remember, don't just think them, don't just teach them what to think, teach them how to think. My name is Praise God. I'm the founder of the Educators Hub and the organizer of the monthly Crash Course. Thank you for hanging out with me. See you next time.